The church was a masterpiece of light and grandeur. Its tall stained glass windows spilling jewel-toned beams across polished wood pews and flower-lined aisles. To the crowd, it was the perfect wedding, soft music swelling from the organ, the bride radiant in white lace, the groom composed yet touched, and rows of guests smiling as if witnessing a fairy tale. Olivia sat among them, her lips curved into the expected smile, but her jaw stiff with the effort of holding it in place. Each clap, each gasp of delight, each whispered how beautiful from the guests around her was a sharp contrast to the storm brewing inside her chest. She watched as her sister Vanessa, glowing, confident, utterly certain, moved gracefully toward the altar. But Olivia's gaze wasn't fixed on Vanessa. No. Her eyes, despite her attempts to resist, found Ethan. His face, familiar yet painfully changed with time, tilted upward to meet his bride. He stood only a few feet away, and yet it felt as though there were oceans between them. He didn't look at her, not once. His eyes seemed tethered to the moment, to the woman on his arm. But Olivia knew, or perhaps only wished, that he could still feel her presence. The air was heavy, suffocating, as though the entire church was filled with a secret only she carried. The man everyone celebrated today had once been hers. As the vows began, Olivia's thoughts betrayed her, dragging her back to another time. Years ago, in the messy warmth of college dorms and under starlit skies, Ethan had been hers. Not a casual fling, not some passing crush, but hers in a way that had felt eternal. She remembered the way his voice softened when he promised her forever. The way he touched her cheek as if she was the only person in his world. They had shared more than love. They had built dreams together, whispered plans of a small house, travels across Europe, and late-night kitchens filled with laughter. And then, without warning, it was gone. Ethan vanished. One day he was there, holding her close, and the next he disappeared as though swallowed by the earth, leaving her with nothing but unanswered questions and the shards of her heart. She had spent nights pacing, waiting for a call, an explanation, anything to prove that their love hadn't been an illusion. But silence stretched into years. And then one evening, Vanessa, sweet, confident Vanessa, had introduced him at a family dinner as her new boyfriend. Olivia had smiled, congratulated, and clapped along like everyone else, while inside she crumbled. Today, as Ethan stood at the altar exchanging vows with her sister, Olivia was forced to relive every broken promise and every night of grief. The man who once vowed to love her forever now stood pledging his life to someone else. To her sister, no less. Round her, celebration swelled. Vanessa's friends dabbed their eyes with tissues. Relatives whispered about how perfect the couple looked, and the pastor's voice rang out with solemn authority as vows were exchanged. Olivia sat utterly still, trapped in a performance she hadn't agreed to, clapping and smiling at all the right moments while inside her chest a quiet war raged. She could feel Ethan's avoidance as keenly as a blade. He never once glanced at her, though she knew he must sense her there, just as she felt him. Every detail carved itself into her memory. The way Vanessa's hand trembled with joy as she slipped the ring on. The nervous laugh Ethan gave before saying I do. The eruption of applause that followed. To everyone else, this was the birth of a perfect union. To Olivia, it was the funeral of what had once been hers. She forced herself to clap along, each sound echoing like betrayal in her ears. Her chest tightened, her throat burned, but her face remained a mask. And in that moment, beneath the sound of cheers and organ music, her heart whispered the truth she could never say aloud. He was mine before he was hers. And now, he's gone forever. It was both confession and eulogy, a reminder that she was both witness and mourner, forever tied to a secret that no one else would ever know by day. Olivia's life was a blur of case files, deadlines, and coffee cups gone cold before she had the chance to drink them. As a paralegal at a mid-sized law firm, she carried the weight of responsibility without the recognition, drafting briefs no one read with her name attached, chasing signatures, juggling clients who barely acknowledged her, and staying long after the attorneys had left for the night. Ambition kept her moving forward, yet exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. She dreamed of law school, of standing in a courtroom with her own voice commanding respect. But every time she dared to imagine it, self-doubt rose like a tide. Vanessa had been the one praised for her achievements, the daughter whose confidence turned heads and won admiration. Olivia, in contrast, had always been the quiet one, dependable, yes, but unremarkable. A supporting character in her own family story. She told herself independence was strength, that her solitude was chosen. But deep down she knew the truth. Her life often felt like a shadow of the one she had once hoped to live. Each late night in the office, surrounded by fluorescent light and silence, reminded her of how small she sometimes felt. Hardworking, yes, but never enough. Not for her family, not for Ethan, and not even for herself. At home, the divide between the sisters had always been a quiet, unspoken truth. Their mother never said outright that she favored Vanessa, but it lived in the subtle ways she looked at her eldest, eyes sparkling with pride at every accomplishment, voice warm with admiration when introducing her at social gatherings. Vanessa, our star, she would beam, recounting stories of her promotions, her elegance, her charm. Olivia, on the other hand, received softer praise, polite nods, faint smiles, and the kind of encouragement that felt more like consolation. Olivia works hard too, their mother would add, almost as an afterthought, as though her achievements were a shadow cast by her sister's brilliance. Their father loved them both. Olivia knew that much, but his love was quiet, muted, the kind that avoided conflict rather than challenged it. When Olivia's hurt showed, when she longed for someone to notice her effort, he would offer a gentle pat on the shoulder or a quiet "I'm proud of you," but never loud enough to balance the scale. It wasn't that Vanessa was cruel. She wasn't. She was radiant, magnetic, but also blissfully unaware of the shadow she cast. Olivia grew up in that shadow, learning how to make herself small, how to swallow the bitterness that came from always being the other daughter. That unspoken hierarchy still lingered, and though Olivia tried to convince herself it no longer mattered, it echoed in her bones every time her mother looked at Vanessa with shining eyes. And then there was Ethan, the wound Olivia never allowed to scar. On the surface, he was everything Vanessa's husband should be: accomplished, charming, admired. Guests at family dinners leaned in when he spoke, charmed by his composure, dazzled by his success. Yet Olivia, from her corner of the room, noticed the cracks others missed. The brief pauses when his eyes flickered toward her before quickly shifting away. The almost regretful softness in his expression when their paths crossed too closely. It was never acknowledged, never spoken, but it haunted her. To everyone else, Ethan was her sister's perfect match. To Olivia, he was the ghost of a love that had once defined her youth and a reminder of promises broken. Without explanation, she told herself she was over him, that the years had dulled the ache. But the journal tucked beneath her bed betrayed her. Its pages were filled with letters she never sent, words she never spoke, confessions written in ink but trapped in silence. It was her only release, the place she admitted the things she refused to say out loud. How she still wondered why he left. How she hated him and longed for him all at once. How her independence was nothing more than armor hiding wounds too raw to expose. Ethan's presence in her family was both torture and temptation, a mirror of everything she had lost and everything she still couldn't let go. The reception glittered with champagne laughter and the shimmer of fairy lights strewn across the garden, but Olivia felt none of its warmth. She drifted along the edges of the celebration, smiling mechanically when relatives approached, retreating when the music grew too loud. Her heels clicked across the stone pathway as she slipped outside for air, grateful for the cool night that brushed against her flushed cheeks. She thought she was alone until she heard footsteps behind her, hurried, uneven. When she turned, Ethan was there, the glow of the garden lights painting half his face in gold, the other half in shadow. For a moment, neither spoke. She stiffened, ready to walk away, but his voice broke through, low, urgent, trembling. "Olivia," he said, almost a plea. She froze at the sound of her name, spoken like a confession. Then the words came, spilling out before she could stop them. "I never stopped loving you. I only married her because I had no choice." Her chest tightened, her throat closed. For years she had imagined what she would say if this moment ever came. She'd curse him, laugh in his face, demand answers. But now, standing under the night sky, the music muffled behind them, all she could feel was the violent pull of old wounds ripping open. His eyes glistened with something between sorrow and desperation. And for the first time since he left, she saw the boy she once knew staring back at her. The boy who promised forever. She wanted to tell him to stop, to shove the words back into his mouth before they poisoned her all over again. But Ethan pressed on, voice quivering as though every syllable cost him. "It's not what you think. Vanessa," she knew something. Something about my family, something I couldn't let out. She threatened me, Olivia. Said if I didn't marry her, she would destroy everything. Olivia's pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity, to accuse him of inventing excuses for betrayal. But his tone carried a rawness she couldn't ignore. His hands shook, clenching into fists at his side, as though he was holding back the rest. "I can't tell you what it is, not yet. But you have to believe me. This wasn't my choice." The words cut sharper than any silence ever had. She searched his face, desperate to find a lie, but instead saw something that unsettled her more. Fear. Real fear. Her mind raced. Vanessa, the sister who had always been adored, admired, flawless in her mother's eyes. Could she really be capable of something so cruel? A part of her recoiled, refusing to accept it. Another part, quieter but persistent, whispered that she had always underestimated Vanessa's hunger for control. Ethan's eyes bore into hers, silently begging her to trust him, to remember the love they once shared. But Olivia's insides twisted with confusion. Anger roared against the pull of longing. Betrayal fought against the temptation of believing him. The man who had shattered her was now asking her to see him as the victim. By the time Ethan turned and walked back toward the glowing reception hall, Olivia's world had splintered. She leaned against the stone wall, her breath ragged, her chest aching as though her ribcage were too small to contain the storm inside her. She wanted to scream at him, to drag Vanessa into the garden and demand the truth, to throw the entire night into chaos. Instead, she forced herself back inside, wearing her mask again, her smile brittle as crystal. All through the toasts and dancing, Ethan's words replayed in her mind like a song she couldn't silence. "I only married her because I had no choice." Fury and heartbreak churned together, but beneath them was something worse, curiosity. What secret could Vanessa possibly wield that would force a man like Ethan into marriage? Olivia told herself she wouldn't get dragged into his orbit again. She had survived losing him once. She would not let him shatter her twice. And yet, later that night, when the guests had left and the noise had faded, Olivia found herself in Vanessa's dressing room, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name. Among the discarded bouquet ribbons and silk garment bags, She noticed a folded envelope tucked half hidden beneath a vanity tray. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it free. The handwriting on the front was Vanessa's, unmistakable, elegant, deliberate. Olivia unfolded the letter, her pulse hammering in her throat. The words inside made her breath catch, her body stiffen. Ethan hadn't been lying. Vanessa had been keeping secrets, and suddenly, Olivia was caught in the middle of something far darker than heartbreak. At first, Olivia tried to convince herself she was imagining it. The way Vanessa's smile sometimes didn't reach her eyes. The subtle sharpness hidden in her laughter. The way she nudged Ethan to comply with her suggestions under the guise of helpful guidance. But the evidence was there, undeniable to anyone willing to see. Vanessa's control wasn't overt. It was crafted, deliberate, a game she played with precision. During family dinners, Olivia caught the way Vanessa positioned Ethan in conversation, how she steered him to agree with her ideas and subtly undermined his suggestions. Even more chilling were the moments alone, when Vanessa's words dripped with quiet venom disguised as care. "Don't forget who won, Olivia," Vanessa had whispered once, her voice soft yet cutting. "Don't try to compete. You'll always be second best." Olivia had recoiled, not from the words themselves, but from the certainty in Vanessa's eyes. A dangerous confidence that made the words feel like a cage. Olivia's stomach churned as she realized she was not witnessing a woman in love, but a strategist meticulously plotting dominance over everyone around her. Her heart ached not just for Ethan, but for herself, trapped in the shadow of her sister's brilliance, beauty, and now cruelty. She wanted to warn Ethan, to pull him away, but something in him froze her, a hesitation, a silent acknowledgement that he too was caught, unwilling or unable to fight back in the presence of Vanessa's cunning. The truth was heavier than heartbreak alone. It was the chilling realization that the man she still loved and the sister she once adored were bound together by lies and fear. As if Vanessa's manipulations weren't enough, Olivia found herself suffocating under the weight of her mother's expectations. At one dinner, a seemingly innocent comment spiraled into a full reprimand. "Why are you acting so distant, Olivia? This is your sister's night, her life. You should be celebrating her, supporting her, no matter what." Her mother's words carried the weight of familial duty, a reminder that loyalty to the family always came first, even at the cost of her own emotions. Olivia wanted to speak, to challenge the unfairness of it all, but the words stuck in her throat, choked by guilt and the lingering sense of inferiority that had defined her life. Every glance toward Vanessa seemed to confirm her mother's judgment, the perfect daughter, radiant in victory, demanding admiration without effort. Olivia felt cornered, torn between standing up for herself and preserving the fragile harmony of family. The memory of Ethan's trembling confession haunted her. She was no longer only battling feelings of betrayal, but also a suffocating pressure to prioritize others over her own shattered heart. The tension inside her grew with each passing day. Every smile she forced at family gatherings, every nod to her mother's commands, every polite agreement with Vanessa's opinions was an act of suppression, a sacrifice of her own identity. The anger simmered beneath the surface, mingling with longing, suspicion, and the quiet, gnawing pain of invisibility. Olivia realized that navigating her family's expectations was as dangerous as confronting Vanessa's manipulations. Both held traps designed to keep her contained, compliant, and, most cruelly, silent. Driven by a mixture of curiosity, hurt, and a need for justice, Olivia began digging into the shadows Vanessa had so carefully hidden. At first, it was small clues, inconsistencies in financial statements, hushed phone calls, quick glances exchanged between Vanessa and Ethan. But soon the truth became undeniable. Vanessa had been embezzling money from their parents' business for years, and Ethan had been aware all along. The revelation struck Olivia like a physical blow, twisting her grief and anger into something darker. A sense of betrayal layered on top of heartbreak. Vanessa's threat, she realized, was not just about securing Ethan's compliance. It was about leveraging the family's vulnerabilities to her advantage. Olivia confronted Ethan privately, needing answers, but dreading the confirmation of her worst fears. His confession was reluctant, pained, almost unbearable. He had stayed silent to protect her, to prevent Vanessa from hurting their father, to shield Olivia from the consequences of a truth too heavy for one person to bear. And yet, he admitted, his love for her had never died, even as he had walked the aisle with Vanessa. The weight of his words crushed and ignited her all at once. They were bound now, caught in Vanessa's web, unable to act freely without risking devastation. Olivia's sense of isolation deepened. She could trust no one, not her sister, not even fully Ethan, who was trapped by his own promises. She realized that reclaiming truth, love, and control would demand courage she wasn't sure she possessed, and every step forward was likely to draw her deeper into a conflict that threatened to consume everything she had ever held dear. The air in the dimly lit study was thick with tension, the scent of polished wood and stale perfume hanging heavily. Olivia had followed an instinct she could no longer ignore, creeping toward the faint sounds of raised voices. Through the half-open door, she saw them. Vanessa, her eyes wild with fury, pressing Ethan against the edge of the desk. The fury in Vanessa's voice was a living thing, cutting sharply through the room. "You'll never leave me, because if you do, I'll destroy your precious Olivia too," she screamed, her words like a whip. The room seemed to shrink under the weight of her intensity, the shadows on the walls twisting as though echoing the malice within. Ethan, for all his composed exterior, appeared small, cornered, his hands raised in futile defense. Olivia's chest constricted, a mix of shock, fear, and disbelief ripping through her. She had always known Vanessa's manipulations were subtle, surgical, but hearing her name wielded as a weapon sent a jolt of terror and rage through Olivia's veins. She realized in that instant that Vanessa's control extended beyond her imagination. It had invaded her family, her relationships, and, most painfully, her heart. Her vision blurred, her hands trembling, but something hard and resolute began to form inside her. No longer a passive observer, she felt the heat of indignation flare into action. Every stolen glance, every belittling comment, every subtle act of sabotage over the years coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. Vanessa was dangerous, and Olivia could no longer remain silent. Olivia burst into the room, her voice slicing through the chaos like a blade. "Enough," she shouted, and the sound startled both Vanessa and Ethan. Vanessa spun, shock quickly curdling into anger, while Ethan looked on helplessly, caught between the two forces of love and fear. For the first time in her life, Olivia stood tall, her body trembling but unyielding, channeling years of resentment, heartbreak, and the quiet humiliation of being the second-best daughter. "You think you can control everyone?" she demanded, eyes blazing. "You think threatening my life and manipulating those you claim to love will make you untouchable? I'm done being invisible, done being afraid, and done letting you dictate everything." The room seemed to pulse with energy. The air charged as words long suppressed poured from her like molten lava. Memories of Ethan's disappearance, Vanessa's subtle digs, their mother's favoritism, and the crushing burden of family expectations fused into a single, volcanic eruption of truth. Her anger was raw, unpolished, and finally, liberating. She demanded answers, called out every lie and manipulation she had endured. Ethan flinched as Vanessa's calm, calculated facade cracked under the weight of Olivia's rage. The power dynamic shifted in that moment. The sister who had always been the puppet master faced someone who would no longer be manipulated, someone unwilling to be silenced or subdued. Every word, every accusation, every revelation was a reclaiming of self. Olivia was no longer the girl who had cried silently while watching her first love marry her sister. She was present, unafraid, and indomitable in the face of years of control. As the echoes of her confrontation faded, Ethan stepped forward, his expression fractured, vulnerable in a way that Olivia had not seen before. His voice shook, weighted with confession. "Olivia, I still love you. I never stopped. But I can't leave her. Not yet. She has too much power. If I try, she could hurt you. Hurt everyone I care about. That's why I stayed silent all these years. I begged myself to survive, to protect you. And I failed." The words, both heartbreaking and excruciating, should have shattered Olivia, should have driven her to flee or surrender to despair. But instead, something stronger than grief rose within her. She could feel the pull of old love, but it no longer had the power to dictate her choices. "No," she said firmly, the words slicing through the tension like steel. "I'm not running anymore. I won't let fear govern my life, and I won't let you, or anyone, take my future." Her eyes locked with Vanessa's, fierce and unyielding, and then with Ethan's, filled with a quiet resolve that shook him more than any plea could. She realized that love was no longer enough to justify hiding, silencing herself, or allowing her life to be dictated by threats. Vanessa may have taken him once, but she would not take Olivia's freedom or her future. The room was charged with the tension of broken alliances and the electric clarity of self-assertion. Olivia had crossed a threshold. She had faced the storm, named the betrayal, and chosen her path. She would survive, fight, and reclaim what was rightfully hers, not just Ethan, but her own voice, her own power, and her own destiny. "You took him once," she whispered, almost to herself. "You won't take my future too." Months had passed since the storm of revelations, confrontations, and family upheaval, and life had slowly begun to stitch itself back together for Olivia. She had moved into a modest but bright apartment, one that was entirely her own. No shared spaces, no lingering shadows of Vanessa, no traces of old expectations. The walls were bare at first, save for a few framed photographs of quiet moments she had cherished alone, cityscapes at sunrise, the small cafe where she often wrote in her journal, snapshots of the skyline through rain-specked windows. At work, her diligence and skill had finally begun to earn recognition. The promotion she had long dreamed of was no longer a distant aspiration, but a concrete reality. Her name now carried weight on memos, her insights respected in meetings, and colleagues came to her for guidance rather than passing over her contributions. Each morning she dressed not in armor, but in confidence. The reflection staring back at her from the mirror no longer obscured by self-doubt. Olivia moved through her days with a quiet strength, aware of her past pain, but no longer defined by it. She laughed freely, without hesitation, and spoke without second-guessing herself, her voice carrying a weight that was earned, not borrowed. The city outside mirrored her own transformation, alive, chaotic, and yet full of possibility. For the first time in years, Olivia felt the simple, grounding pleasure of existing for herself, not as a reflection of anyone else's desires or judgments. The weight of past heartbreaks had been replaced by the solid, satisfying knowledge that she could survive and thrive, wholly independent and capable of shaping her own narrative. One afternoon, as she sifted through the stack of mail, Olivia's eyes landed on a wedding invitation, its cream-colored envelope elegant and formal. For a heartbeat, a flicker of the old ache threatened to rise, memories of betrayal, heartbreak, and years spent watching Vanessa thrive at her expense pressed uncomfortably against her chest. But as she turned the invitation over in her hands, she realized it wasn't from Vanessa. It was for a friend, someone she had once met casually but had grown to care for through small, meaningful interactions. Instead of bitterness or jealousy, a gentle warmth spread through her. She smiled, a small, unguarded smile that carried the weight of her growth and acceptance. She set the invitation aside on the counter, a simple gesture that symbolized her release. She would honor relationships that mattered, celebrate love without needing to compare or compete, and allow joy without the shadow of envy. The wedding invitation, once a potential trigger for regret or anger, became a quiet emblem of her own journey, a reminder that she could witness love, happiness, and milestones without being tethered to the pain of the past. In that moment, she understood the profound freedom of perspective, that life could continue to offer moments of beauty and connection even as she claimed her own space and agency. The past would always exist, but it no longer dictated her responses, no longer confined her choices, and no longer had power over her heart. That evening, Olivia settled into her favorite corner by the window, journal open, pen poised. For the last time, she allowed herself to write not with longing, not with unresolved questions, but with clarity and finality. He was my first love. She was my first rival. But neither defines me anymore. I finally chose me. The words were both declaration and liberation, a recognition of the journey she had endured and the personal power she had reclaimed. She closed the journal gently, a soft smile curling her lips, and rose to leave the apartment. Outside, the city stretched before her, streets bathed in the golden pink glow of dusk, the wind teasing her hair and tugging at her coat. She walked with a steady, confident stride, unhurried yet purposeful, absorbing the freedom she had fought to reclaim. Each step echoed her independence, the rhythm of her movement a silent celebration of self-determination. She was no longer waiting to be chosen, no longer dependent on validation from others, no longer trapped by past loves or rivalries. Olivia was complete in her own right, her heart whole and her spirit unburdened. The city seemed to recognize her transformation, its lights sparkling in quiet acknowledgement, as though it too celebrated her newfound freedom. In the vastness of the streets, amidst the ordinary hum of life, she finally belonged, not to anyone else, but fully, unapologetically, to herself. And in that moment, she understood that the greatest victory wasn't reclaiming love or winning a battle. It was claiming her own life, her own joy, and her own story, free and unshakable.